So, good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, UPSC Mains 2024 Gender Studies Paper 1 Analysis. Till yesterday, we have discussed some important questions, and today's session also will try to finish the remaining questions which were asked in Mains Examination 2024, particularly Gender Studies Paper 1. So, by discussing these questions which are asked by UPSC in this mains examination, you get to know what kind of a questions UPSC has been asking, and in fact UPSC has been regularly repeating themes of the questions. Even though you may not get the questions as it is from the previous year questions, rather by discussing, by understanding the nature of the questions, you could also see that the themes of these questions have been regularly repeated by the UPSC. Remember, I have stressed on few syllabus topics from which UPSC has been asking questions very regularly, and if you look at those syllabus topics: Indian art and culture, modern Indian history, world history, Indian society, and post-independence Indian history, and apart from that, this climate change and geography, physical geography, Indian geography, world geography. So from all these topics, questions are regularly repeated. Now this question, if you look at the Gangetic Valleys question, so this is clearly from Indian geography portion of this Gender Studies Paper 1 syllabus. The question is: groundwater potential of the Gangetic Valley is on a serious decline, and how it may affect the food security of India. Now if you look at the Gangetic Valley, in fact it has been sustaining a huge population in the northern plains, and in fact Gangetic Valley is very well known for its rich alluvial soil, its fertile soil, and its towns, cities sustaining population, and fertile soils have also been sustaining the crops, a wide variety of crops such as wheat, rice, and it has also been contributing to the larger food security of India. But in recent times, what has been happening due to various factors, the river Ganga and its tributaries and overall Gangetic Valley has been experiencing a decline in its water levels, and decline in water levels or poor quality of water levels that would further impact the groundwater tables as well in the valley region. And in fact, if you look at the agriculture which is being practiced along this Gangetic Valley, most of the agriculture is dependent on either the river water and also the groundwater, but declining groundwater tables would certainly impact agriculture, irrigation around the Gangetic Valley. So in this context, the groundwater potential of the Gangetic Valley is on a serious decline due to multiple reasons, and how may it affect the food security in India or food security of India, and that is the question. And this is also very easy question, and if you understand the nature of this question, you could easily attempt this question. And in fact, now why groundwater potential has been declining at a faster pace? So that is what we need to understand, why there has been a significant decline in the groundwater potential of Gangetic Valley. So there are certain reasons. We all knew that these rivers are known as perennial rivers, right? So these rivers are known as perennial rivers. They are known as perennial rivers because continuous flow in those respective rivers. However, the reason for a continuous flow of water in those perennial rivers is because of regular glacial melting, right? So regular glacial melting has been contributing to the regular flow of water in those rivers. But in recent times, what has been happening is that glacial melting has been taking up at a much faster pace because of the global warming and also climate change. This glacial melting in the Himalayan region has been taking at a faster pace, and that leads to the either overflow of the water in these rivers or regularly decline in the water levels among these perennial rivers. And in future, we could say that the water levels, because primarily these perennial rivers are fed by the glacial melting, but absence of glacial leads to these rivers losing their perennial nature. They may not have water throughout the year, and that would also significantly impact the groundwater recharge tables. And apart from that, if you look at the agriculture sector in India, so Indian agriculture sector primarily depends on unscientific irrigation practices, where we bring the water, groundwater, and we just flood the fields with the groundwater. And that is another major reason. Exploitation of the indiscriminate exploitation of the water resources in this region is also another major reason for the serious decline in the water tables. And apart from that, groundwater pollution is also another major reason. Pollution of groundwater or pollution of surface water is another major reason, which makes water not potable. And apart from that, urbanization is also another major reason. Now generally with urbanization, what has been happening, so throughout these urban areas we very often see these concrete jungles, right? So with concrete jungles, it would not be easy, or it would not be possible to groundwater seepage, right? So groundwater seepage would not be easy or not possible with the urbanization and concrete jungles. There is no proper planning. And with the urbanization, generally what has been happening, there are certain urban sponges as well, right? So certain urban lakes, wetlands, so those urban sponges and urban wetlands are also being increasingly encroached upon, and this would be the another major reason for the declining of groundwater tables in the Gangetic Valley. And plastic pollution would be another major reason, right? Plastic pollution has also been contributing, because plastic pollution very often blocks the seepage of water, the surface water into the ground, converting it into the underground water. So plastic pollution would be another major reason. And in fact, if you look at the Ganga river and its main tributaries such as Yamuna, which flows through major cities like Delhi, now generally what has been happening with these rivers, including Ganga river, the floodplains of the rivers, which are very very important for the recharging of groundwaters, so these floodplains are very often encroached upon by the people. So encroachment of the floodplains have also been contributing either to floods and also a serious decline in the groundwater tables of these rivers. So therefore all these factors have been contributing to the serious decline in the groundwater potential. Now if you look at Indian agriculture, around 90% of the Indian agriculture or Indian agricultural irrigation is primarily dependent on underground water resources, and Indian agriculture also having a poor water uses efficiency. So because of all these reasons, indiscriminate exploitation of the underground water resources, so when we don't have adequate water to sustain agriculture, sustain various crops that are being cultivated, of course we could see that less number of crops are being cultivated, and food productivity would also substantially declines. And in fact, if you look at India's population, it would be around 140 crore, and it is also very important to sustain the food security needs of 140 crore Indian population. Now as of now, we have achieved self-reliance in terms of food production and also food consumption, but it is not easy for India to ensure food security for 140 crore population, and a serious decline in the underground water tables in the Gangetic Valley would significantly pose challenges with respect to the food security in future. So therefore adequate measures have to be taken so that the underground tables should be recharged at a quicker pace, at a faster pace, even though it takes decades. But at the same time, certain water conservation measures have to be undertaken at different levels, and that would ensure that Indian agriculture would be protected from the serious decline in the groundwater tables of Gangetic Valley, and also make sure that food security of India's population can be ensured, right? So this is how we could understand this question very briefly. So I hope you have got a structure for this answer. Now let's look look into the approach of this question. And if you look at the approach for this question, so first and foremost, what you have to do, you just introduce the importance of Gangetic Valley for India. Now, how Gangetic Valley has been playing a very important role in ensuring food security, sustaining lives and livelihoods of the people, and also providing drinking water, irrigation, water for industrial needs, and aesthetic purposes. So everything. So you can write this so that the introduction would be more and more impactful. And then you have to write some reasons for the serious decline in the groundwater potential. Remember, we have already discussed the reasons for the serious decline in the groundwater tables in the Gangetic Valley. And then you have to write the impact of decline of groundwater potential on food security. And then you have to conclude the answer by suggesting some measures through which you could overcome this problem, right? Now, in the introduction, as I have already emphasized, that you just briefly write about the importance of Gangetic Valley for India, for different aspects. So the Indo-Gangetic Plain, also known as the Northern Indian River Plain, right? So it is also known as the Northern Indian River Plain. Now, if you look at the Indian map clearly, so you could see that this region, so this region is known as this region is known as the Northern Indian River Plain or Indo-Gangetic Plain. And in fact, it has been encompassing an area of 172 million acres, and it is a very fertile region because this Indo-Gangetic Plain is having a rich alluvial soil, and rich alluvial soil is very often fertile soil, and it supports a wide variety of crops. And this region has been encompassing the northern regions of Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Haryana, Punjab, and even Bihar, and several other smaller states, even West Bengal as well. So Gangetic Valley stretches from the Indus River Valley. So we all knew that Indus River flows like this, and Indus River also has a various tributaries. So therefore Gangetic Valley stretches from the Indus River Valley in the west to the Brahmaputra River Valley in the east, and it also includes the delta of River Ganga, Brahmaputra rivers. And in fact, both Indus River and Ganga River and Brahmaputra River, so they form part of world's largest alluvial tract, right? So in fact, Ganga River Basin supports a significant portion of India's population, no doubt about that, because Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Indus River deltas are very important, very significant, because they support a significant portion of India's population and even economy as well. And in fact, they also provides water for irrigation, drinking water needs of people along the Northern Indian plains can be met, and industrial purposes also they would supply water, and they support agriculture, fisheries, and other livelihoods of the people in the Northern Indian plains. And in fact, these rivers also supports or serve as a major transportation routes. They also facilitate trade, commerce in the region, right? So this is how you could write an introduction in this question, and then you have to mention some reasons for the serious decline in the groundwater potential of this Ganga River. So when you discuss about the reasons for the serious decline of groundwater potential, so first and foremost you have to write that the impact of the climate change is the primary factor. Because of the global warming and climate change, rising temperatures, now what has been happening, there's either altered precipitation or the precipitation levels have been changing because of the rising temperatures. Because the reason for the changing precipitation levels is because of the climate phenomenon such as El Nino and La Nina. So these are the phenomena which have been contributing to the changing precipitation patterns, and these phenomena are because of the climate change. And right, so climate change, and both El Nino and La Nina have have a major impact on the Indian monsoon and extreme weather events, and so all these things have an additional challenges Ganga river system, and this would lead to the decline in the water levels of river Ganga, and that has been further impacting the groundwater potential of the rivers. And glacial melt in the Himalayas, for example, this glacial melt in the Himalayas also affects the river flow, water availability, while sea level rise also threatens the coastal areas in the deltaic region as well. Because with the melting glaciers, generally what happens, is that the flow of the river would decline, and declining flow of the Ganga river, or changing the nature, the perennial nature of these rivers over a period of time, led to the decline in the groundwater recharge, and that also impacts the groundwater availability in the northern Indian river plains. And apart from that, construction of dams, barrages would also be another reason, and even irrigation can also. So all these things would lead to the diversion of water, and they also altering the natural flow of water and even fragmented habitats. So this would also contribute to the declining water tables. And water diversion for the agriculture sector, a huge amount of water is being used for the agriculture sector alone in this Gangetic Valley. And when it comes to the agriculture sector is having a low water use efficiency, and maximum water is extracted and exploited from the underground tables. Since Indian agriculture is not having the water usage efficiency, so this has been leading to the faster extraction or exploitation of the water resources, and the hydropower generation and urban consumption have reduced the downstream flow, affecting the ecosystems and also the livelihoods as well. And in fact, deforestation, soil erosion, and sustainable land use practices in the Himalayan region have also been contributing to the reduced. For example, when we have a thick forestation, in this Himalayan region, so the forestation would help in holding the water molecules, and that would also lead to the groundwater seepage and increases the water tables. But deforestation has been taking place at a faster pace because of increasing human habitation, human settlements, and soil erosion has also been taking place. And even unsustainable land use practices, which are widely prevalent in the Himalayan region, have been contributing to the sedimentation and siltation, and even reducing the groundwater table. So this would be another major reason for reducing the or declining groundwater tables. And in fact, all these factors have been not just leading to the declining water tables, but they also reduces the water quality, they disrupt the aquatic ecosystems, and they also increases the risk of floods and landslides as well, right? So then you need to write the impact of decline of groundwater potential on food security. Now, how the decline of groundwater potential would impact the overall food security, and that is what we need to discuss about. So in fact, this Indo-Gangetic Basin, or the Gangetic Valley, has been providing for more than 1/3 of India's surface water. So this Gangetic Valley or Gangetic Basin is responsible for providing more than 1/3 of the India's surface water, and 90% of this surface water which is used for irrigation needs alone. So you can imagine that how much of water is being used for irrigation. And in fact, the fertile Gangetic Valley is also home to some of the poorest sections of India's population, with more than 200 million people living below the national poverty line, right? So declining groundwater tables would not just impact the agriculture, would also impact the livelihoods and lives of the people, because most number of poor people in India are living in this Gangetic Valley. And in fact, millions of people are residing in the lower reaches of this Ganga basin, and in fact those people may also face the food shortages as well because of the declining groundwater tables. And it is expected that in the next 3 decades the groundwater tables or the flow in Ganga river would significantly decline, and that would impact the food production and food productivity as well. And in fact, the Ganga river would continues to lose water due to factors including unsustainable groundwater extraction. Remember, the agriculture which is practiced in the Gangetic Valley, farmers very often extract waters in an unsustainable manner, and they also flood the fields with the water, and this is known as unsustainable groundwater extraction practice. And because of this unsustainable groundwater extraction, over a period of time farmers would not have adequate water resources to irrigate their fields. So this would in a way also contributes to the declining agriculture productivity and production, and that would also create a new food security challenges. The combination of groundwater of around 70% and even river water 30% and availability would actually runs the farming system that yields the food crops. So you can imagine that around 70% of the total water which is being used in the agriculture sector is from the groundwater resources, and rest of the 30% is from the underground water resources. So dwindling the Ganga would also severely affect the water which is available for surface water irrigation, and in fact it is also having the potential for decline in the food production in the future as well. So this food in fact a detailed survey also predicts that it also shows that about 115 million people can be impacted due to insufficient availability of food in the next few decades. So overall we could say that in future we would face a significant drop or decline in the river water flows in the Gangetic Valley, and also significant decline in the underground water table in the Gangetic Valley, and that would also substantially or significantly impact the agriculture which is practiced in this Gangetic Valley plains. So therefore that would also impact India's food security, and it is not just about the food security but it also impacts the lives and livelihoods of the people who dependent on the agriculture sector in this region, and that would also further fuel migration as well. So therefore in this context the immediate need of the hour is that we need to revive river Ganga, and we should also promote a sustainable water usage methods or water use efficiency through methods such as drip irrigation and sprinkler irrigation. So those methods have to be promoted among the farmers, and that would ensure that water use efficiency, because the government can also provide subsidy to the farmers, and that ensures or that helps farmers to quickly transform themselves to sustained or efficient water usage techniques. And revival of river Ganga is also very important, particularly with respect to water quality. Sewage treatment plants have to be set up, and there should be proper regulations for the industries which are located on the banks of the Ganga river, so essentially to improve the quality of river Ganga and also prevent it from regular pollution or pollutants entering into this particular river. And there is also a need to further strengthen or enhance awareness among the people about the river conservation or river water conservation, water management techniques, etc., and watershed management, water conservation. So all these things have to be properly followed so that water would be conserved, and at the same time the Ganga river and the total Gangetic Valley underground water tables can be substantially increased, and that would also sustains agriculture productivity can be enhanced, and that would also supports food security of India's huge population. So therefore study has been forecasting that in the absence of interventions from the government, groundwater contribution to Ganga river's water flow would continue diminishing in the summer for the next 30 years, and that would seriously impact the agriculture and food security in the not just in the region but in entire country, because remember that we have not yet achieved population stabilization, right? So population continues to grow, and growing population and reducing or declining area under cultivation, so all these things would pose a serious challenges such as food security. So therefore in this context we need to focus on increasing the groundwater recharge as well as the water flows, or protecting the Gangetic Valley's water flows, right? So next important question. So remember, I've told you that in geography, climate change, Indian geography, world geography, and also physical geography. So these are the topics within the geography, and this question is from the world geography and physical geography. So question is, what are the aurora australis and aurora borealis, and how these are triggered? Okay, so in fact, so these are, in image you could see that these are lights right? So these are lights in different colors, and these lights are very often tourist attractions. They are very fascinating, and you could observe these lights in both northern poles and southern poles. So these kind of lights that you observe in the northern poles are known as aurora borealis, and the lights that you could observe in the southern hemisphere are known as aurora australis, right? So these are two different kinds of lights, but you could observe them only in the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. Now this is very simple question, and there is no directive word is being attached for this question, so therefore it would be very easy for you to frame a proper structure for this question. So when you look at the approach for this question, in the approach, first and foremost, you just introduce what are the aurora australis and aurora borealis, right? So a brief introduction would be enough about these two phenomenon, and next you have to define or give a brief detailed description about aurora australis and aurora borealis, and then you have to write how these aurora australis and aurora borealis would be triggered, and then ultimately you would write a conclusion. So that's how you could write this answer in a very simple fashion. But remember that in geography questions always try to draw a diagram. Now you cannot draw these lights, but rather you could draw this map easily. You can draw a globe, and you could show aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere, aurora australis in the southern hemisphere. So that would be more and more impactful. And in the introduction, as I have told you, that you can give a brief detail about both aurora australis as well as aurora borealis. And in fact, aurora are commonly known as right, so this term aurora also commonly known as the northern lights or even the southern lights. So the northern lights are also known as aurora borealis, and southern lights are known as aurora australis. And in fact, the both aurora australis and aurora borealis are natural light, and they are natural light display in the earth's sky in both northern hemisphere as well as the southern hemisphere, and they could be predominantly seen in high latitude regions. Now what are the high latitude regions? For example, the polar regions are known as high latitude regions, and subpolar regions are also known as high latitude regions. So these natural light display of or these auroras can be observed in high latitude regions, both Arctic and Antarctic regions. So auroras display a dynamic patterns of brilliant lights that appear as curtains, rays, spirals, or even dynamic flickers, and they usually cover the entire sky, right? So this is how the aurora australis and aurora borealis are. So that's how you can give a brief description or brief introduction about both the aurora australis and aurora borealis. And auroras are actually the result. So as I've already told you, these auroras are either known as northern lights or the southern lights, right? So you could call them either northern lights or the southern lights. So auroras are the result of disturbances in the earth's magnetosphere, so which are being caused by the solar winds. Now earth has a magnetosphere, but at the polar regions the magnetosphere of the earth is more prominent. So therefore solar winds very often attacks the magnetosphere, and solar winds impact the magnetosphere of the earth, which is more prominent across these poles, and that's how the phenomenon of aurora is being formed in the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. And then you have to write about both aurora australis and aurora borealis in a very brief manner, right? So this would be the second part of the question, right? So remember that aurora australis, as I have already told you, that they are natural lights, but they are formed over the southern hemisphere. But when it comes to the aurora borealis, so they form at the northern pole or in the northern hemisphere. And in fact, both aurora australis and aurora borealis were natural light displays, right? So they are natural light displays, and in fact they appear in the sky as curtains, rays, spirals, flickers of light. And in fact, when we talk specifically about aurora australis, so these aurora australis are also known as the southern lights, right? So they are also known as the southern lights because aurora australis appear in the southern hemisphere in the southern pole region. And in fact, the aurora australis display is seen in the southern hemisphere near the south pole of the planet Earth. And in fact, the places where we could observe these aurora australis include Australia and New Zealand, right? So I hope you have understood these aurora australis. And when it comes to the aurora borealis, and these are complete opposite to the aurora australis, these are also natural light display in the Earth's sky, but they are also known as the northern lights, right? So they are known as the northern lights. And in fact, so this display is specifically seen over the northern hemisphere, particularly over the northern pole. Like how the aurora australis are being observed in countries of New Zealand and Australia, in a similar way aurora borealis can also be observed in few countries such as United States, United Kingdom, and even India's Ladakh as well. So in these places aurora borealis can be observed. So however, what usually trigger these auroras, both aurora australis as well as aurora borealis? Now, what are the factors which could trigger or which would lead to the formation of these auroras? So auroras are being triggered by solar activity, and the solar activity, because if you look at sun, so sun very often the source of solar winds, very often the source of coronal mass ejections, and that would have a significant impact on Earth's magnetosphere, right? So that would impact Earth's magnetosphere. So magnetosphere is more prominent over both northern hemisphere as well as the southern hemisphere, right? So Earth would sun would be the major factor. So from sun there would be regular solar winds, and apart from solar winds, these coronal mass ejections, and coronal mass ejections would also result in the solar winds, and solar winds impact Earth's magnetosphere, right? So they impact Earth's magnetosphere. So auroras are being triggered by the solar activity, and this solar activity, particularly coronal mass ejections and solar winds, causes the charged particles from sun to interact with the Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field, right? So we have a atmosphere, and atmosphere sustains life on this planet, and these solar winds or charged particles which are released from the solar winds interact with the Earth's atmosphere as well as the Earth's magnetosphere as well. And in fact, a particular phenomenon such as solar flares and even coronal mass ejections that we have just discussed, these coronal mass ejections and solar flares, they release a large amount of these charged particles, and then these charged particles which are being released into the space, they interact with Earth's atmosphere and Earth's magnetosphere as well. And Earth has a magnetic field around the Earth has a magnetic field. So Earth's magnetic field protects the planet from most of these solar winds, right? So in fact, if solar winds reaches Earth, and that would damage Earth's atmosphere. So therefore the magnetosphere of the Earth protect Earth from the solar winds. But when we talk about the magnetosphere at the poles, the field lines are little bit weaker. The magnetosphere lines are little bit weaker, and that would allow some charged particles to enter the upper atmosphere, right? So they would enter the upper atmosphere or high altitude regions, both northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Now when these charged particles from the solar flares and coronal mass ejections and solar winds would start interacting with the upper atmosphere in northern pole and the southern pole, so they would collide with the gas molecules in the upper atmosphere. There are certain gas molecules in the upper atmosphere, so these charged particles would start colliding with the gas molecules in the upper atmosphere, and then they would transfer the energy to the gas molecules and then excite those gas molecules. molecules. So when these gas molecules are being excited, and they over a period of time return to the normal condition. So when they return to the normal condition, they release the energy that they got from these charged particles. They release energy in the form of light, and that would create a phenomenon called aurora. So this is how auroras are being formed in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So these auroras, or the natural light display on Earth's sky at a higher latitudes, is caused by the solar particles, and these solar particles very often having the charged particles, right? So they are very often known as the charged particles, and they collide with the gas atoms in the Earth's atmosphere, and that would strip away electrons, and that would create ions in an excited state. So these ions then emit the radiation at different wavelengths, right? So that would produce a characteristic colors. There are different colors which are being formed, and in fact the aurora australis and aurora borealis display are polar lights, or polar aurora polaris. This would be another name for aurora australis as well as aurora borealis. So in fact we all knew that they appear at Earth's magnetic folds, and if you look at the different colors through which the aurora australis and aurora borealis can be seen, so they emit a wide range of colors such as blue, red, yellow, green, and the orange colors. So these are the different colors that we could see these natural light phenomenons in the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. But the aurora australis and aurora borealis are the number one tourist attractions, right? So they are one of the best tourist attractions across the world, because they attract a lot of tourists to those places. And in fact we could also say that the Earth's magnetosphere has also been changing, and it regularly changes. We could get some important insights over the changes that have been taking place in the Earth's magnetosphere by regularly studying these aurora australis and aurora borealis. And climate change as a phenomenon has also impacting the visibility and magnificent nature of these auroras. So you could write a conclusion in this way and ultimately conclude this answer, and I hope you have understood the aurora australis as well as aurora borealis. And the next very important question is about twisters. So I hope you might have heard this term for the first time, twister, because it is not the regular question which UPSC asks, right? So last year also UPSC has asked about a geography question sorts, and this year UPSC has come up with a twister, and demographic winter would be another term. So you have to be prepared, and you have to make sure that such things you have to know about that, right? So because last year also there was a 10 mark question on zones, and a majority candidates don't know about what are those zones unless you have geography as an optional. But this year also they have asked about the demographic winter and twister, another phenomenon, another physical phenomenon. So if you don't know about these terms, you cannot write answers, and that too this is a 15 marker answer. So you have to be little bit in detail, in depth. You should also understand these terms, only then you could write a best possible answer for these questions. The question is, what is twister? A very simple question. And why are the majority of these twisters are observed in areas around Gulf of Mexico? Now, so when we talk about the twisters, another name for the twisters are tornado, right? So tornado is another name of twister. So maybe if this question has asked about tornadoes, you might answer this question, but twister is altogether a new name, right? So twisters are also known as tornadoes. Now there is no directive word attached to this question. This is very simple. Very simple question, just asked what is twister and why are majority of the twisters are observed in areas around Gulf of Mexico. Now if you knew what are these twisters and how these twisters are being formed, so you could easily address this particular question, right? So approach is very important for every question, and when you look at the approach for this question, first and foremost, so you have to introduce or you have to define what are these twisters. You have to write what are these twisters in the introduction itself, and then you have to discuss the conditions, so the conditions which support the formation of twisters, and then discuss some reasons why majority of these twisters are observed in the areas around Gulf of Mexico, and ultimately you have to conclude this answer, right? So this is how you could have a proper structure of the answer, you could have a proper framework for this particular question. First and foremost, you have to write what is twister, or it is also known as tornado. So tornado and twister are different names for the same type of storm, right? So storms which usually takes place in the northern, so I would say, so this is how, right? So this is how the Northern America looks like, and somewhere this region is known as Gulf of Mexico, right? So Gulf of Mexico, and in this region, particularly the eastern part of Northern America, you would experience these twisters or tornadoes, but they are very prominent, or most of these twisters takes place in the Gulf of Mexico region because of some reasons. So we'll discuss about those reasons later. And in fact, tornado and twisters are different names for the same type of a storm, and in fact these twisters are a violently rotating column of air over the land, and they are associated with a severe thunderstorm. You might have seen in movies or even YouTube videos that how they usually revolve. And so whatever, if vehicles comes in their way, if houses comes in their way, so they just destroy all those things which comes on their way, and those are known as either twisters or tornadoes. And tornadoes are usually the downward spiraling, and they are stemming from the cumulonimbus clouds. Remember, these are these are in fact cumulonimbus clouds, but these twisters are the downward circulating, so they circulate the downward circulating or downward spiral of winds with a huge force and power, and they originate from the cumulonimbus clouds, and they are very often accompanied with rain, hail, and even sleet as well, right? For example, if they encounter a house on their way, so they would easily destroy house, or so a lot of destruction, loss of life, loss of property, damages to the property would be caused by these twisters. And what are the conditions which favors the formation of these twisters, and that is what we have to understand now. So the instability, that would be unusually instability, also one factor which favors the formation of these twisters. So unusually warm and humid conditions in the lower atmosphere. We have to divide the atmosphere into the lower atmosphere and the upper atmosphere, right? So there are certain conditions which favors the formation of these twisters, and in the lower atmosphere, the warm and humid conditions, right? So both warm plus humid conditions in the lower atmosphere, possibly cooler than usual conditions in the upper atmosphere, right? So cooler condition or cool conditions in the upper atmosphere, so that would result in instability, and this instability favors the formation of the twisters. And then wind shear would be another factor that also favors the formation of these twisters. Now when I say a wind shear, so wind shear usually means that there would be a different speeds of wind movement at different altitudes, right? For example, 10 kilometer per hour experienced at the lower part of the atmosphere, but 50 kilometer per hour wind speeds are experienced at the higher latitudes. So therefore there would be a difference in the wind speeds at the lower atmosphere or upper atmosphere, lower altitudes or the upper atmospheres. And so the wind shear refers to the wind direction changing, and wind speed has been increasing with the height. So with increasing height, how temperature declines, but with increasing height, so wind speeds have been increasing, and even the wind directions have also been regularly changing, and that's how it favors the formation of the twisters. For example, the southerly wind with 15 miles per hour at the surface, and that would immediately change to southwesterly direction or westerly direction with a wind speed of 50 miles per hour at 5000 feet altitude. So that is known as wind shear, and this wind shear also forms or favors the formation of tornadoes or the twisters. And in fact, the tornadoes form when a warm air at the lower atmosphere meets the cold air conditions at the upper atmosphere, and that would create the unstable pressure conditions, and that favors the formation of these twisters or tornadoes. There are certain reasons, and these reasons are these are the reasons for formation of majority of twisters around the Gulf of Mexico region. Remember, I've told you that this is the Gulf of Mexico region, and this region have a certain geographic conditions, and that favors the formation of majority of twisters in this particular region, right? In fact, the Gulf of Mexico region provides a continuous supply of warm moist air, right? So that would provide a warm moist air, and that feeds into the lower atmosphere. So remember, so for the formation of tornadoes or twisters at the lower atmosphere and upper atmosphere, in the upper atmosphere we need to have cool conditions, and in the lower atmosphere we need to have a warm air, right? So we should have a warm and moist air at the lower atmosphere, and this warm air mass is essential for the development of thunderstorms, which are precursors to these tornadoes, right? So instability, because these tornadoes or twisters are being formed when this warm moist air meet the cold air, and that would result in instability, and that's how these twisters or tornadoes are being formed. But the Gulf of Mexico usually provides the supply of warm and moist air, and that would feeds the lower part of the atmosphere. Secondly, in the central United States, because when you look into the map of this northern part of America, so this is Canada, US and Mexico, right? So this region would be the Gulf of Mexico region. So in the central part of the United States, particularly areas around the Gulf, cold dry air from the Rocky Mountains. So this is the region where Rocky Mountains are located in the northern America. So the Rocky Mountains or Canada can clash with the warm moist air of the Gulf of Mexico. Remember that the conditions in the Gulf of Mexico region provide a continuous supply of warm moist air. So the Central America, Rocky Mountains or Canada provides the cold air. So cold air would collide with the or meet with the warm air, and this sharp temperature differences would further create a strong instability in the atmosphere, and that would leading to the severe thunderstorms, rain and formation of either twisters or tornadoes as well. And strong winds at varying altitudes, or winds with the different altitudes, that is known as wind shear, right? So wind shear is increasing wind speed with increasing altitude, or changing the directions of the wind with increasing altitude. So varying altitudes and directions, which is known as wind shear in the Gulf of Mexico region, would also contribute to the development of rotating thunderstorms as well. And these rotating thunderstorms which are being developed in the Gulf of Mexico region are also called as supercells. Now, what are the characteristics of these twisters or tornadoes? Tornadoes and twisters have certain characteristics on their own, and if you look at the characteristics of these twisters and tornadoes, so they are being formed due to the interaction of warm moist air with cool dry air during the thunderstorm. So this would create the instability, and this instability is the major driving factor for the formation of tornadoes or the twisters. Remember, the lower atmosphere having the warm and humid air, and the upper atmosphere having the cool conditions, and when the warm moist humid air meet the cooler air, and that would create instability, and that would results in the formation of these tornadoes or twisters. And in fact, these twisters and tornadoes, the wind speeds can reach up to 300 miles per hour, and in fact it would be the one of the highest or one of the highest speeds of wind. And typically it has a short duration, but it can also cause extensive damage to property and the infrastructure as well. Now, not just property and infrastructure, it would also leads to the loss of lives as well, and it would also damages the agriculture as well. So therefore, these twisters or tornadoes are very often accompanied with large scale destructive force along with them, right? So ultimately, in conclusion, so not just India but almost every country across the world has been increasingly vulnerable to various cyclones and even tornadoes and twisters in the Northern American continent. And in fact, the global warming has been increasing. Climate change has also been contributing to the increasing intensity and frequency of these climate phenomena, and they are also becoming more and more destructive over a period of time. And all these factors have been resulting in conditions for the formation of cyclones, and this has led to increased weather events causing damage to man and material, right? So they're causing damage to man and material. And the next very important question, so the question is, what is regional disparity and how does it differ from diversity, and how serious is the issue of regional disparity in India? So that is the question that we are going to discuss, right? So India as a country, we do not have the inclusive development. We have not achieved the inclusive growth or inclusive development across all parts of India. So that is true. And apart from that, we have the highest levels of inequality. So inequalities are existing. So for example, when I say inequalities, we have regional inequalities. So inequalities at the regional level are existing, and income inequalities are existing. Income inequalities, and even regional inequalities, income inequalities, and also gender inequalities. So all these different types of inequalities are existing, and we have not achieved inclusive growth and inclusive development. And at the same time, there's a stark difference in development, right? So regional imbalances in terms of development. So therefore, India as a nation which has been experiencing all these problems, there's no inclusive growth, no inclusive development. There are regional imbalances in growth and development. There are also inequalities existing, regional inequalities, income inequalities, and gender inequalities, and high levels of poverty has been existing. High levels of poverty has also been existing, and even the illiteracy is very high in India compared to other developing countries. So therefore, we could say that there are a lot of regional disparities within India, because we have number of states. In those number of states, the per capita income, so there is a difference in per capita income of people. So, right, so poor per capita income, higher levels of poverty, and lower levels of literacy rates, regional imbalances, inequalities, and no inclusive growth and inclusive development across the state. Now, if you carefully look at this map, so you could see all the states or the union territories which are color coded in yellow. So they have the national income, or they have the per capita state domestic product is below than the national average. But on the other hand, the states which are being marked in the green color are having the per capita state domestic product more than the national average. So there are a lot of developmental differences, and that is known as the regional disparities. For example, now Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and even Karnataka are more industrialized states, but on the other hand you could see less industries in states like Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Jharkhand, Bihar. Why this difference? And in fact, these states which are being marked are called as Bimaru states: Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan. So all these states are known as Bimaru states. So they are also known as poor states, and that indicating there's a huge regional disparities which are being existed in India. Now you have to write what is a regional disparity in the introduction, and then you have to write how this regional disparity would be different from the diversity that we have in India. Remember, India is a multi-diverse, multicultural societies, and a huge diversity is existing in India. Now in this context, how serious is the issue of regional disparities? Now how serious the issue of regional disparity in India, and how could we address the issue of regional disparity? And that is what we need to address in this answer, right? So initially, first and foremost, you have to define what is regional disparity. So you just write an introduction and explain how does regional disparity is different from diversity, and then discuss the issue of regional disparity in India and conclude the answer with some suggestions on reducing the regional disparities. So this is how the approach of the answer should be. And initially in the introduction, so you have to write what are these regional disparities. So regional disparity refers to the differences which are existing in the economic development. For example, if I can give you an example of the regional differences in terms of economic development. So as I've already told you that states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat and Maharashtra are more developed, industrially developed. There are more industries, there's more production and better livelihood opportunities and higher incomes for the people in those states. But on the other hand, compare these states with Madhya Pradesh, Bihar and Jharkhand, right? So there's a lot of difference in terms of economic development, and there is also uneven economic and social achievement in different geographical groups. For example, compare the literacy rates of Kerala with the state of Assam or state of Bihar, Jharkhand, or compare the level of maternal mortality rate or infant mortality rate or institutional deliveries which have been taking institutional deliveries, right? So there's a huge difference in terms of socio-economic development across different regions of India, and that is known as the regional disparities. And the coexistence of relatively developed and economically depressed states, right? So you could mention these: Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra and MP, Bihar. So in India as a nation, there is a coexistence of relatively developed and economically depressed states. Even regions with each state is known as the regional imbalances. So these are known as regional imbalances, and in fact many countries across the world, not just India, this is a phenomenon. In many countries there are these regional disparities, regional imbalances are existing across many different countries. So many countries are characterized by significant regional disparities in economic performance, living standards, and they are also reflected in income, education and health outcomes, right? So in fact, now what are the regional imbalances of development? For example, political factors. The regional imbalances are because depends on the political stability and the development versus religion as an agenda that people used to take into account. Conflicts such as civil wars and land reforms are certain political factors which are the major factors determining the regional imbalances, regional disparities in different parts of India or different states of India. And geographical location of states is also a very important factor which decides the regional balances or regional disparities. For example, certain states in India have access to coast, and there are also hinterland in India such as Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. So you could imagine the development of the coastal states and the hinterland states and difficult terrain, for example the northeastern part of India or Jammu and Kashmir. So difficult terrain would also result in regional disparities. And natural resources, for example, there are certain states which have rich natural resources, but on the other hand other states may not have such natural resources. And the north-south divide that has been existing in India is also another geographical factor, and certain economic factors as well. So when we talk about the economic factors, for example, industrialization is one factor. So a few states where they are highly industrialized, but on the other hand other states there are no industries at all, because investments, those states have failed to attract investments, and investors are not interested to invest in those respective states. And per capita income, there's a difference in terms of per capita income across different states. Now you can agree with my point of view that across India all states may not have the same per capita incomes. There are different per capita incomes across different states of India because of the different degrees of development that they have achieved. And green revolution, there are certain states where green revolution as a phenomenon started, and green revolution has substantially increased the farmer income and increased agriculture production, agricultural productivity. And certain states there's a lot of connectivity and infrastructure. For example, the northeastern states of India, right? So northeastern states, there's no connectivity, there's no infrastructure. No, when there's no connectivity, no infrastructure, how could how could you expect more development in the northeastern part of India? And there are population and the fertility rate, and in fact gender inequalities and education literacy. So these factors also impact or decide the regional disparities or the regional imbalances. And historical factors such as population of a particular state, for example UP, for that matter, one of the state with the largest population. So population makes the existing resources scarce, and you would not get enough resources. And there's also huge burden on the government to spend these resources. And apart from that, the centers of trade, colonial exploitation and partition. So all these are the different factors which influences regional disparities and imbalances. So next part of the question, you are being asked to write the differences between regional disparities, regional imbalances and diversity, right? So in terms of definition, regional disparity means the unequal distribution of resources, wealth, opportunities across different regions. So these are known as the regional disparities. But when it comes to diversity, it is very easy that it encompasses the presence of different cultures, linguistic and social differences. In India itself, we are being called as multi-diverse, multicultural society because of different regions, different castes, different classes, different ethnic groups, different languages, different religions. So because of all these reasons, India is a multicultural and multi-diverse society. And apart from that, in a regional diverse disparities, primarily economic and developmental, focusing on gaps in growth, socio-economic development, and gaps between different states or different regions in terms of growth and development. But when it comes to the diversity is rooted in cultural, ethnic, linguistic and social varieties. And when we talk about the economic gaps in terms of regional disparity, so economic gaps have been existing in states like Maharashtra and Bihar versus urban and rural areas. Now we also have the urban and rural disparities, the gender disparities, gender divide or digital divide, right? And diversity in languages. For example, we have different languages in India: Tamil, Bengali, Malayalam, Kannada and Odia. So festivals such as Diwali, Bihu and different foods, so different types of entertainment. So these forms part of the diversity. And in fact, because of a huge regional disparities which have been existing across different parts of India. So it leads to calls for equitable development and even equitable resource allocation, so that the regional disparities can be prevented. However, the diversity celebrates coexistence of various identities, or it may cause identity conflicts as well, right? So now, effects of regional disparity: it causes political instability, it results in violence, it results in communalism, and it results in autonomy for more resources, or it demands for autonomy, demand for resources, and it would also cause social unrest as well. But on the other hand, diversity can further strengthen or enrich cultural richness, but can lead to conflicts if not managed properly, right? So that's how you could write the differences between regional disparities and diversity. And then you have to discuss the issue of regional disparities which are existing in India. Now, what kind of a regional disparities are existing in India? So the level of infrastructure development, right? So in terms of development of infrastructure across different parts of India, for example, so there's a difference in power distribution between these different states, and all states don't have the proper irrigation facilities. There's a difference in irrigation facilities across different states, and there's lack of infrastructure such as connectivity infrastructure, and the roads and other connectivity infrastructure is very, very important to make sure that this agriculture produce is reached to the nearby markets on on time. So all these are state subjects, and therefore states don't have the adequate resources to improve the connectivity infrastructure. Make sure that adequate schools, adequate healthcare facilities are built to provide quality education, quality healthcare for the people, to ensure access to power for all, access to electricity for all. Make sure that adequate irrigation facilities are being provided for the people. So that is very, very important, because we have a number of people who are dependent on agriculture sector, who are dependent on the elite sector, who are still below poverty line. So therefore all these measures have to be undertaken to ensure that there's adequate development across all parts of India. And in fact, there's also a very lower levels of social expenditure by states on education and healthcare and even sanitation. Now, what is a social expenditure? Now, social expenditure is the expenditure which is being incurred by the government on certain social sectors such as education, healthcare, skill development, sanitation, gender equality, poverty alleviation. So all these kind of expenditure of the state is known as the social expenditure. But in India, there is a varied capacity of states to spend resources on different social sectors, and these are a very important aspects, and in fact we could say these are the core subjects of human resources development. And state governments, instead of being associated themselves with the political aspects, they should take care of the human resource development, because human resource development is long term. So state government should focus more and more on human resources development, but in the longer term, so that will help in addressing the disparities, regional imbalances, achieving equality, increasing the per capita income of the people. The states which have witnessed heavily on these subjects fall under the developed and advanced states, and India's economic growth has not matched its rapid population growth, right? So there's a rapid population growth, but India's economic growth has not matched its rapid population growth, and this has led to lack of equal job opportunities in all parts of the country. There are a lot, for example, India's growth is known as jobless growth, right? So India's growth is known as the jobless growth. So when India opened up its economy for reforming its economy, which is also known as LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization and globalization, so after that what generally happened, there's a huge investment which came to India, there's no doubt about that, but majority of that investment came into the service sector, and that is the major problem with respect to the job creation, gainful employment creation in India. Majority of these investments came into the service sector. Now, service sector is not a labor intensive sector, rather manufacturing and industry is the labor intensive sector, right? So because of that reason, India is not able to create adequate employment opportunities, because majority of the investments after India opened up its economy went into the service sector. Service sector is not labor intensive sector, and still India has been neglecting the industry and manufacturing sector, because industry and manufacturing sector is labor intensive sector, and labor intensive sector has a huge potential to address the regional imbalances and regional disparities in India. But on the other hand, there is also the north-south divide which has been existing. North-south divide. Now when I say this north-south divide, so within the north-south divide, so northern states are considered as less economically, socially developed compared to the southern states, because southern states have achieved industrialization. Southern states focused on industrialization, and southern states have access to the coast. So there are certain advantages: industrialization, coast, and southern states have invested in human resources development, and southern states have also made enormous success in terms of improving its education infrastructure as well as the healthcare facilities in those respective states, and that has helped significantly increasing the literacy rates of those people. Along with the literacy rates of those people, southern states have also successfully controlled the population growth rates, and all these factors have contributed to the growth and development of these southern states compared to the northern states. But these things you hardly observe in the northern states, and that's why there's a huge difference in terms of social development, economic development of the northern states and the southern states. So therefore, ultimately, we need to focus on labor intensive sectors, manufacturing and industry, especially the micro, small and medium enterprises. Skill development is also a very important aspect that has to be focused on. Skill development and further improving the education as well as healthcare infrastructure, that is very important. Connectivity is also a very important aspect that we should focus on. Irrigation, right? So irrigation is also another important area that we need to focus on. So all these things have to be increasingly focused on, so in order to ensure that there would be no regional disparities or regional imbalances, and equitable development, equitable growth is the ultimate agenda for India in this 21st century, and we have to be an equitable India free from the regional disparities or regional imbalances by the year 2047. By that particular point of time, we aimed to achieve, or we aimed to become the Vikasit Bharat or developed India. So that's how you could conclude this answer. So next important question is critically analyze the proposition that there is a high correlation between India's cultural diversities and socio-economic marginalities, right? So as I've already told you that India is a multicultural society, so we have a huge diversity in India, and there are also socio-economic marginalities. For example, caste system is considered as socio-economic marginality, and people in BPL category or below poverty line category, caste discrimination and gender inequalities which are existing, gender inequality in India, and patriarchy has been existing, right? Patriarchy, gender inequality, patriarchy, right? So caste based discrimination or caste distinctions which are still existing, right? So these are socio-economic marginalities which are being existed in India. Now in this context, so what should be the approach? So the question has been saying that there is a correlation between the cultural diversities in India, the religion is caste. So no, we cannot call when we say diversities, we have there are different castes, different ethnicities, different religions, different regions, and these diversities have been contributing to the socio-economic marginalities in India. So we need to critically analyze this. So we need to give a counter to this particular argument. So initially you have to explain the cultural diversity in India in the introduction, and then you have to write a correlation between India's cultural diversity and socio-economic marginalities, and discuss the essence of socio-cultural diversities in India. And ultimately you have to conclude the answer by suggesting ways to reduce the socio-economic marginalities. Now initially you could define what constitute the socio-cultural diversities in India. So the cultural diversity is actually defined as a set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual and emotional features of the society or a social group. So that includes lifestyles, value systems, traditions and even beliefs. So examples for the same is, for example, India is a multicultural, multi-diverse society, and India comprises of people from different religions, different languages, different races, different ethnic groups and different regions. So India is the best example of multicultural and multi-diverse society. Now in this context, we need to find out whether there is any correlation between India's cultural diversity and the socio-economic marginalities. So that is what we need to find out, and if there are any points, so we could mention about those points. Now if you look at that, so India is having multiple cultures, and these multiple cultures in India often align with different geographical regions. For example, the northeastern states, right? So we have the northeastern part of India, which is very often don't have a proper infrastructure or better connectivity. So, but the northeastern part of India is having a unique tribal culture, but that northeastern part of India faces a disproportionate socio-economic marginalities or marginalization due to geographical isolation, poor infrastructure and even limited industrial development, right? So these factors have been contributing to the poor socio-economic marginalization of the people in the northeastern part of India. And then we have a caste system, right? So we have traditional caste system which is still existing in India, right? So in fact there are certain caste groups which are considered as historically disadvantaged groups or historically marginalized sections, particularly the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. So they are known as historically disadvantaged caste groups. And since they are historically disadvantaged caste groups, they were very often denied education, healthcare and even employment because of the wide discrimination which is prevalent across different sectors. And in fact, many scheduled castes and scheduled tribes often continues to face discrimination, and they also live in poverty despite the affirmative action policies. Now what are these affirmative action policies? Now when I say affirmative action policies, so that is reservation for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes in education and healthcare, right? Reservation for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in education. Remember that 15% of the reservation is given for the scheduled caste in education and not healthcare, education and employment, right? Sorry for that. Education and employment, 15% of the reservation for scheduled caste is given by the constitution, and then 7.5% of the reservation is being given to the scheduled tribes, and as based on the Mandal Commission recommendations, 27% of the reservation is being given to the other backward classes in education and employment, right? So this is known as the affirmative action to correct the historical disadvantages of the people who suffered this, right? So previously. And apart from that, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes still face a huge discrimination, right? So in their workplaces and in villages, in their social life, they still face a huge discrimination. They face a lot of discrimination. And historically in India, marginalized communities such as Dalits, Adivasis, and other backward classes, OBCs, so they face the social exclusion or systematic exclusion, and even that leads to the persistent existence of poverty or prevalence of poverty as well. And women from a certain marginalized community such as Dalits, Adivasis, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and OBCs. So they also face the dual burden of socioeconomic deprivation, discrimination, and also the cultural patriarchy as well. And that would lead to the higher levels of illiteracy, maternal mortality, and even increased unemployment rates as well. Now, ultimately, we should not undermine the socio-cultural diversities. So no doubt that to some extent socio-cultural diversities have been contributing to this marginalities, socio-economic marginalities, but we cannot undermine the diversity. India as a multicultural, multi-diverse society. And so why socio-cultural diversities in India are so important? Because of certain reasons. Because the socio-cultural identities help in further strengthening the national identity, right? So these different cultural elements that are existing in India, so they help shape national identity. So we have a national identity, and the national identity which is based on shared aspirations of the people and their hopes, and it is not just based on particular religion and a particular language. And in fact, India's diversity can also help people feel a sense of brotherhood, harmony, despite the differences in terms of ethnicity, language, region, caste. So despite all those differences, they can feel the sense of brotherhood and harmony, so despite all these differences. And in fact, India's diversity and unity can help it gain global recognition, and that is a power of, that is a tool for India's greater soft power, and that would also help India become one of the best example for the world. And in fact, India's diverse range of cultures, languages, so they can also help the country communicate more effectively with the different parts of the world. So that would make India a multi-diverse society, and that would also help India further build on existing soft power, build goodwill with number of countries. So ultimately, you could write a way forward in the conclusion. So there should be certain social protection programs such as direct benefit transfer program, so that would help people escape poverty. And respect for the culture, brotherhood, harmony is very, very important. So a sense of toleration has to be promoted. Respecting all cultures is very, very important. And universal access to education is also very, very important, along with other social welfare benefits such as education, healthcare, employment opportunities, skill development. So that is very important to achieve equitable and inclusive growth and development in India. So that's how you could write a way forward for this particular question. And that's all in this lecture, in this session. And thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.